Part 1. The shape beneath the Iseth wind had been howling for days across the Kalama River basin. In Yakutia, at -60 C, the air doesn't just freeze your breath. It feels like it's stripping the skin off your bones. For the nomads, who followed their reindeer herds across the tundra, this was nothing unusual. But what they found that February morning was unlike anything they'd seen in their lifetimes. It began with a hunter named Spiridon. He was walking along a frozen river bend, following a set of fox tracks, when he noticed something strange protruding from the ice. At first, he thought it was driftwood, the kind that sometimes got trapped in the permafrost for decades. But as he got closer, the driftwood took on a darker, curved shape. It wasn't wood, it was bone. And not just any bone, it was a massive, spiraling tusk. He crouched down, his fur hood brushing the ice. The tusk was thick, yellowed with age, and it curved in a slow, elegant arc that seemed to drink in the weak sunlight. He could see cracks along its length where the permafrost had begun to release its grip. Spiridon's heartbeat quickened. In Yakutia, mammoth ivory wasn't just a relic, it was treasure. But this tusk was still attached to something much bigger. The ice beneath him was clear, and what he saw made his breath catch. There, entombed in the blue, was the dark, hulking shape of an animal so massive it seemed to bend the river round it. The legs were thick pillars. The head, half turned, still bore the long trunk that had once swept snow from the ground. Its fur, reddish-brown and shaggy, lay plastered against its body under centuries of frost. This was no skeleton. This was a whole mammoth. Spiridon stumbled back, his boots crunching against the brittle surface. He'd heard of such discoveries. Old men in his village still told stories about finding the ice giants. But to see one here, this close, was something else entirely. He knew the permafrost sometimes surrendered its dead when the winters grew strange. But the size of this creature was almost beyond belief. It could easily weigh 10 tons, maybe more. By the time Spiridon returned to camp, his face was raw from wineburn, and his voice cracked with urgency as he told the others. The elders listened in silence. They knew the finding of a mammoth was more than chance. In their traditions, it was an omen. Some said it meant the winter spirits were restless. Others whispered that such creatures should never be disturbed, for fear of angering what lay beneath the ice. Still, curiosity outweighed superstition. The next morning, Spiridon led a group of 6 men and 3 women back to the river bend, their sleds pulled by steaming, frost-covered horses. The cold was brutal, the kind that made the leather reins freeze stiff, but excitement kept them moving. When they reached the site, even the elders gasped. In the full morning light, the mammoth seemed almost alive. The ice trapped every detail, the folds of skin, the tangle of its thick hair, even the closed eyelids. As if it were simply sleeping under a glassy shroud. They began to clear the snow, their wooden poles knocking away layers of frost. The sound echoed over the river, mingling with the groaning cracks deep within the ice. Every strike revealed more of the beast, and every reveal brought new murmurs. A tail, a massive shoulder hump, the thick, splayed feet built for crushing snow. But as the sun dipped low and the temperature dropped even further, a shadow crossed the group. The ice beneath their feet gave a long, deep moan. One of the elders muttered something about the old ground waking up. They all froze in place, eyes darting between the mammoth and the shifting river ice. Spiridon gripped his spear and looked down at the colossal shape. It was strange, but for the first time since they arrived, he felt as if something was looking back at him through the ice. Part 2. Breaking the ice-bee morning. Word of the find had already spread to the other camps. More sleds arrived, this time bringing not just hunters, but young men with axes, chisels, and long iron poles, tools for cutting into the permafrost. The air was thick with steam from the horses and reindeer, their breath turning instantly into ice crystals that drifted away like smoke. Spiridon stood at the river's edge, scanning the gathering. He could feel the weight of the elders' unease. According to Yakut legend, mammoths were creatures of the underworld, banished to the frozen depths after some great ancient battle. To dig one up was to break a pact with the spirits of the cold. But there was also the more practical truth. The ivory alone could buy enough supplies to feed 3 villages for a winter. And this one had tusks the size of a man's body. The work began at dawn. The men hacked at the surrounding ice, sending sharp blue shards flying. The women built a small fire on the riverbank to melt water for tea, their voices carrying songs. In the old tongue, a rhythm to keep the cold from creeping deep into the bones. Every blow against the frozen river sounded like striking stone. The ice was ancient, compressed over centuries, and it fought back with each swing dot as the day wore on. More of the mammoth's body came into view. Its thick fur had kept its form, almost intact, the coarse strands preserved in icy perfection. Spiridon found himself staring at its face, broad, lined, and almost sorrowful, like it knew the fate that awaited it. The closed eyelids were rimmed with frost, as if the creature were weeping icicles. Then came the first sign of trouble. One of the younger men, eager to prove himself, drove his axe to deep. A crack shot across the ice like lightning, splitting the surface near the mammoth's flank. For a heartbeat, everything went silent. Then a low, deep groan came from beneath them, as if the river itself were warning them to stop. The elders stepped back, muttering prayers under their breath. But Spiridon waved the boy off, his own superstition dulled by the sight of the tusks. They pressed on. By late afternoon, one tusk was free enough to touch. It was warm compared to the surrounding ice, as if the mammoth had some lingering life deep inside. Spiridon ran his glove along its curve, feeling every ridge and groove. Worn smooth by centuries in the dark, that night, they built a campfire on the riverbank and kept watch. Coyotes howled in the distance, their cries bouncing off the frozen cliffs. One of the women, old Varvara, leaned close to Spiridon and whispered a story her grandmother had told her, about a time when another group had tried to pull a mammoth from the earth. They found it, she said, but the river took 3 of their men before they finished. It remembers who disturbs it. He didn't reply. His eyes stayed fixed on the shadow in the ice, wondering if some part of that story was still waiting for them. By morning, the wind had shifted. It carried with it a smell, faint but strange, like wet fur and ancient earth. Spiridon knew that smell didn't belong to the river or the snow. The mammoth was beginning to thaw. Part 3, the pull from the past third morning came with a pale sun hanging low, barely skimming the horizon. The sky had the color of hammered steel, and the air was so still that every sound, the crunch of boots, the clink of tools, seemed magnified. Spiridon was already awake before the others, staring at the mammoth's shape in the ice. Overnight, more of its hide had emerged, a leathery, dark brown surface beneath a frost sheen. The smell was stronger now, heavy, animal, and ancient. It wasn't the stink of decay like you'd find in summer, but something older, like a cave sealed for centuries finally breathing out. Some of the younger men gagged when the wind shifted, while the elders only narrowed their eyes, as if the air itself was reminding them of its claim on the beast. The digging resumed. Axes rang out like distant bells. Chisels bit into the frozen riverbed, sending hair-thin fractures spidering across the ice. 2 teams worked in rhythm, one carving away at the ice around the mammoth's legs, the other prying chunks loose with crowbars. The deeper they went, the stranger the scene became. Patches of the mammoth's fur were still soft enough to bend under a gloved hand, while its hooves were encased in clear ice, magnified like relics in glass. By midday, the first tusk was freed. Entirely, it took 6 men to lift it onto a sled, and even then the wood groaned under the weight. The ivory was cream-colored, etched with faint swirls like smoke frozen into stone. Spiridon stood over it, jaw-tight. This was no ordinary find. A tusk like that could buy him a new team of horses, new rifles, even a warm stove for every hut in the settlement. But there was also the unease crawling at the back of his mind, the sense that the river was watching. The second tusk was trickier. It had frozen deep into a slab of blue ice that seemed harder than steel. They poured boiling water from the camp kettles over it, steam billowing into the air. The hissing water sent rivulets racing across the ice's surface, carrying away tiny shards and revealing more of the tusk's surface. By the time the sun dipped toward the mountains, the mammoth's head was free. Its mouth hung slightly open, revealing massive, worn teeth. Frost clung to the inside of its nostrils. Spiridon couldn't help but think it looked as though it had died mid-breath, still fighting against some storm 10,000 years gone. They decided to camp again before attempting to move the body. That night, the air dropped sharply, the temperature biting so deep it made the fire seem useless. Spiridon lay awake in his furs, listening to the groans of the ice. At one point, he thought he heard something else, a muffled, low rumble from beneath, like the mammoth itself shifting in its icy grave. At dawn, a pale mist clung to the river. As they stepped back to survey their work, the truth became clear. Cracks were spreading under the mammoth, forming a jagged ring. The river was loosening its grip, but whether it was letting the beast go or planning to take them with it, Spiridon couldn't tell. Part 4. When the ice finally let go by the time the sun rose high enough to smear the mist with weak gold, the cracks beneath the mammoth had widened into black fissures. They looked like mouths yawning open, each one whispering the same warning, "Hurry." Spiridon barked orders, his voice sharp enough to cut the morning air. Ropes were tied around the mammoth's forelegs and hindquarters, knots yanked tight until they bit into the ancient hide. The sled teams strained at their harnesses, horses tossing their heads, steam pouring from their nostrils. Every man had a role, some pulling, some prying, others chipping away at the last slabs of ice that clung stubbornly to the beast. It wasn't graceful work. The mammoth groaned against the ice like a ship breaking free from a frozen harbor. Chunks the size of millstones crashed into the water, sending up sloshes that hissed against the surrounding frost. A gust of wind rolled down the valley, cutting through every layer of fur and wool, and carried with it a smell that made them all pause. Not death exactly, but the musk of something that had once ruled this land, something that had never known men. The first real lurch came suddenly. The mammoth's shoulder broke free with a wet crack, and the whole carcass shifted forward. The men shouted, hauling on the ropes as if they were wrestling a living giant. Ice shattered underfoot, spraying them with glittering shards. Spiridon dug in his heels, his mittens soaked and stiff, but he didn't let go. Then came the sound, a deep, resonant boom from beneath, like the river itself had been struck with a hammer. One of the younger men shouted that the current was moving under the ice. If it tore loose before they got the mammoth to solid ground, the whole thing, tusks, hide, and all their work, would vanish into the black water. Spiridon made the call, now or never. They threw every ounce of strength into the final pull. The sleds groaned, the ropes strained until the fibers screamed, and then, with a sickening, sucking sound, the mammoth's massive bulk slid free of its icy cradle. It landed on the riverbank. With a thud that rattled the tools in their belts, men stumbled back, panting, faces flushed from the effort and the cold. Up close, the size was staggering, 10 tons, maybe more. The hide still clung too much of its frame, formatted with frost and river mud. One glassy eye was half open, staring at nothing, yet so perfectly preserved it was easy to believe it could see. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the wind over the valley, low and steady. Then Spiridon stepped forward and laid his mittened hand on the beast's side. It was colder than stone, yet it felt heavy with memory. They began to load it onto a makeshift sled built from two lashed frames. It took the entire team of horses to shift it even a few meters at a time. The journey back to the settlement would take days, maybe weeks, but they'd done it. They'd stolen a king from the ice. That night, as the campfire snapped in the darkness, Spiridon sat apart from the others, staring at the mammoth's silhouette under the tarp. The wind shifted, and for just a moment, he thought he heard a distant trumpet, low, mournful, and impossibly old, drifting over the frozen river. He didn't tell the others. Some things were better left between the hunter and the hunted.